Yeah, we're here. All right. Welcome tonight to our Tuesday night podcast. We've been doing this for a while. 100, is this episode 131? Is that right?
I'm not sure.
I think it's 131. All right. Well, anyway, tonight uh, we are going to be talking about dissociative identification disorder. Have you ever heard of
No, no, I purposely didn't look it up. I saw the title of it and I
that?
purposely didn't look it up. I said, no,
So,
I'm not gonna look it up. I'm gonna
total
just,
total transparency. I actually originally was going to call this uh, wow, the words just totally left my mind. Multiple personalities. What's it called? Oh,
schizophrenia.
schizophrenia. Yeah, I was going to call it freedom from schizophrenia, but schizophrenia is actually not the right term. Apparently, it is called dissociative identification disorder.
Okay, all
So,
right.
so multiple personality is kind of the that's the my title.
All right.
Okay. Anyway, uh, this the inspiration for this is my intro, and my wife and I were talking about this the other day, and we were just talking about working with people and you know the things you kind of experience in conversations and in relationships. This wasn't specific to any one person, in particular, but it was more we were just talking about it generally speaking, how there is a common thing actually where you're it's like there's uh, uh, and you'll know what I'm talking about the second I say this, but basically you have person you are up here, and then there's a person you are out here. And often actually, the more you work with people, you see that those two aren't the same people. And so in a sense, you have a person you want to be, and then you have a person you are. And you can look at that from a whole bunch of different angles. You can think about, like, I want to be more, and I'm not what I want to be,
Mm,
right? And so either way you look at it, it can be this is who I think I am, but on the outside and people, perceive you, it's not the same at all. Then you can even go as deep as somebody actually not really knowing who they are at all, which is where this idea of dissociative identification disorder comes into play. And I was doing some research on, like, symptoms, and interesting. We actually had we went to a men's class last night, and we do these kind of on a monthly basis. We have it's specifically geared towards men, but last night was very interesting because he talked about the idea of the mind and having dominion in your mind and your thought process. And he used the scripture of a man taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And so, a roundabout way of, I just want to, like, state the goal for tonight. What I was hoping to the direction I was hoping to go with this is, how do you become a person who has command of their thoughts and command of your mind? So that's kind of the baseline question. We'll start with that.
yeah, I would say that the the main thing. Okay, so it's an interesting thought. I mean, all the way around, it's an interesting thought. Um, I can only speak from the point of view of having been saved because the Bible talks about how talking about a man who rules over himself, and the idea is, you know, being having rule over yourself, and so part of that has to be uh, having control over sin, which we can't have without Jesus. And so that's where why I say from a Christian perspective, because you might be able to discipline yourself, and there are books that have been written, about these kinds of topics and stuff like that. But it's interesting to me that a lot of these topics, a lot of these books on self discipline, it's interesting how a lot of these guys swear. Even in their book, they can't write
Yeah.
without swearing. So it's like they have to swear, in as part of their writing, as if, I mean, I know I haven't been in school for a little while, but I'm pretty sure that they haven't started including swearing in learning to read and write. Um,
Probably coming soon,
yeah, maybe,
though.
but but so that idea, of discipline, discipline, you can have some measure of discipline over your life without being a Christian, but ruling over your spirit is not, and I often use these kinds of people as examples as you look. I won't use names because I don't want it to sound like I'm going after anybody in particular, but there are many famous people, uh, well respected people that they couldn't keep their marriage together. They couldn't. They've committed adultery. You know, but yet they are, they're well respected people, CEOs of companies, brilliant
Yeah.
thinkers, and things like that. But so the idea of ruling over your spirit it's much deeper than just simply being intelligent, or being able to establish discipline. And so a number of there's a lot of ex-military guys who've started these blogs and podcasts and things like that on discipline and getting control of yourself and stuff. And it's all very, very good and very helpful, but it only takes you to a certain level. You really need to understand that if you have to live at a biblical level. You have to live at a biblical level. There's a book that was written by a guy, it was called Living Biblically, that I read, and he wasn't watching it or reading it and doing it as a Christian. He was doing it as a non-Christian, trying to keep the Bible. And it was interesting and it was comical, but the reality is it's impossible. It's impossible to be able to implement without the Spirit of God helping you. So there has to be a desire to want to have control over everything, not just some things, over everything. Because if you don't just decide I'm going to be in control of everything in my life, then there's it's always, everything's open to negotiation.
Yeah.
And so you'll say, oh, I want to do this, but then you'll say you don't want to do it at some particular moment. As long as there are other areas, but when you make the decision, no, I want to be in control of my life as a whole, that's when you start to get control. You can't get control of parts of your life and say, yeah, I got it, because everything spills into everything else.
Yeah, I was thinking about, so the way we have the way that we've kind of, I don't want to call it a theme, but like the anatomy of our podcast really is the reality of God. I've mentioned this before, but it's introducing people to the reality of God. The reality of God is not, it's not a perceived reality, it is reality. And then we have our perceptions, which often are separate from that.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the genesis of man, the beginning, and how man was created, God created man, the body, the mind, to function a certain way and to abide by a certain code, as it were, or a certain compass. And you have, like, obviously now thousands of years later, we've developed what in all reality are perversions and twistings of that nature, that innate nature, and are like when you look at that biblically, you see physical repercussions for that. And you see things like, and it's interesting because as I was researching dissociative identity disorder, the symptoms: anxiety, delusions, depression, disorientation, addiction, memory loss, indecision, suicidal thoughts, self-harm. And if you think about those things, if you just like look at suicidal thoughts or self-harm, maybe not everybody has that, but everybody who lives in sin actually, in a sense, pursues that. When you sin, you're actually self-harming.
Yes.
Right. And so it's like you have these, you look at those things, it's like, yeah, I'm not suicidal, but you're living a destructive lifestyle without even knowing it.
I would compare, what you're saying there, just to make sure that we have the idea right, is that, it's like when I was younger, I loved to drive fast. And, so for me, going down the freeway as fast as my car could go, that was suicidal, but that wasn't my intention.
Right.
My
Yeah,
intention
yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
to kill myself.
yeah,
My intention was to enjoy myself. And so, but that's the problem is that there's no difference between those two
yeah, yeah,
things. Is that doing wrong is still suicidal when
yeah,
it's all said and done, because anything could have happened, driving at, 140, 150 miles an hour on the freeway, is, you know, even a small thing that goes wrong could be the end of your life. And there is a measure of thrill in that, but still, there's the possibility. There's the family, I think they're called the Flying Walendas. They're a family of tightrope walkers, and their, I think now, grandfather, I think it was may not have been in Mexico. It was in a Hispanic country, I think, and fell to his death. He fell to his death. He was on a tightrope. The wind, the rope was shaking, and he's done this all his life. I mean, this is a family of just that they do this, and he died. I mean, living that lifestyle is suicidal, but that's not why they're doing it. They're
yeah.
not doing it so they can die, and so that's the results of. So the results are the same,
Mhm.
and there's obviously you can go too far in playing it safe, but so the idea of living life with I guess we could call it unnecessary risk brings those kinds of things that you're
Yeah,
talking about, because as a Christian, you're not taking an unnecessary risk, because you're living according to God's word
right.
in obedience, which isn't safe. It's not a question of being safe, it's a question of being right. And so doing right, is the place to be, body, soul, and spirit.
Mhm. So what happens first? Like, and the truth is, you're saying I can only speak from being saved. The truth is that's kind of where this becomes uh I don't want to say a non-issue, but it becomes possible. Like you said, it's not possible to have,
Yeah.
control outside of
Well, the
that
reason, yeah, the
context,
reason why
right?
I mention it like that is because the idea of trying, like I said, these guys, some of these guys are military guys. I love reading their books. I love I mean, and their books have helped me to develop areas of my life that I was lacking. But at the same time, that the benefit of that was in the context of the fact that I'm living right.
Mhm.
So to just benefit in that particular area without living right, you're not going to be able to reap the benefits of an integral person, which is, I guess, what you're going after.
Mhm.
The idea of, dissociative is the idea of being, uh, different people in different
Yeah.
circumstances. And it's an interesting concept what you're talking about, because I was just talking about this last night, talking to a friend of mine, and we're driving over to his house, and I was just telling him, as a pastor, how, I when I first became a pastor, it was very frustrating to me working with people, because people can do crazy stuff, but yet it's not their whole life isn't like that. It's just like they're doing fine, and then all of a sudden they make some decision over here that's going to ruin their lives. And I know it's going to ruin their lives, and it's like you're going to lose all this by making this decision, but they can't. The psychological term is cognitive dissonance, and I was talking about how it's for me now, it's absolutely fascinating, to see how people can live in this cognitive dissonance where they're basically running in two different directions at the same time in their lives. And it's fascinating to me. And I was mentioning to him how, it's come to a place now to where when I see people that are doing this kind of thing, is just I say, can we talk? I want to, don't think of me as your pastor. Just think of me as a observer. What's going on in your head, because this and this disagree,
Mm.
and you must know that these things disagree. but you still do both of them.
Yeah.
You still live over here and do this and do that and the other thing, but you know that this disagrees with that, and how are you able to rationalize doing this? And often that it's done without thinking. It's just simply done without thinking. And my friend had mentioned, which is true, it's the obvious answer, is that we have this capacity of compartmentalizing our lives. And so that's what you're talking about, is that's the idea of this disassociation, is because we have compartmentalized ourselves. And so what happens is, when we have one compartment with everything in it, then we're one person. Well, when we make another compartment, now we're two people, and then you make another one and another one and another one. And so you have all these areas that are compartmentalized. So you can, be faithful, well, seemingly you can be loving to your wife and caring and compassionate and all this kind of stuff. And then you're like what he mentioned last night, is your wife can walk out of the room and you can immediately flip on pornography.
Yeah.
And you don't see a disconnect between those two things. And then when you see the car drive up, you turn it off and you put it away and everything's fine again. But everything's not fine. And it's a really scary place to be when you can do that, when you can compartmentalize your life, because what will happen is you'll be fine until you're not.
Yeah.
And there'll be no telling what will happen, when you're not fine.
Yeah.
And so it's a very volatile place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about, again, we're going back to like the beginning of man, but we get a really good example of this in the story of Cain and Abel, because and how much, I'm going to use my testimony here, but how much emotion plays a huge part in this type of cognitive dissonance, like you're saying, because you have, and I'll, when I was balding and had kind of just like, whatever, I'm going to be bald. And you gave me a word. You actually mentioned this in our Friday night, but you didn't exactly mention what you said in a word. You actually prayed for me, and you told me something that I knew was true. And I had identified that before you even said it, but I didn't know how to do anything about it. And I didn't want to do anything about it.
Well, that's the key right there.
Yeah.
Is that when people say, I don't know how, what they mean is I don't want to.
Yeah. And the issue was, and you said this, you said it's like you have two warring people inside of you.
Yeah.
And you have to, I can't remember how you said it, but essentially what you were indicating was that I need to put to death one of those men.
Yeah.
And when I walked away from that, I literally, in my mind, I was thinking, I don't know if I can do that, because one side was feel. The other side was logic and spirit.
Yeah.
And the two were against each other. And inside the turmoil honestly was very, very similar to when I was really addicted to drugs and living that in secret.
Yeah.
And so I would come and live a certain way in front of people, or at least what I thought was a sustainable way in front of people. And then I had this hidden addiction that was really deep and in a sense was killing me and destroying my mind, destroying my perception on life. And I didn't know how to reconcile that issue. And so like what you're talking about, this idea of not wanting to, is what I want to aim at. How do you change that? Because the truth is, if people are honest with themselves, they'll see it's destroying themselves.
No.
You don't think so?
No, that's the thing is, like I said before, it's a frightening, the atheism, well, not so much atheism, but evolution does such a disservice to humanity in this idea that we started life, as nothings, and we over millions of years have developed into intelligent beings, and that there's somehow a relationship between being intelligent and survival of the fittest. And that's a lie. I mean, it's an absolute lie. It's why, it's funny because the whole joke of the Darwin Awards, of people that have done stupid stuff and have hurt themselves or even killed themselves. And, they award them a Darwin Award for doing stupid stuff. And you realize that, intelligence and survival of the fittest are not even related to each other. There's just nothing related to each other whatsoever. Completely, utterly disconnected. And And so, in the idea of what you're talking about here is it's the emotional element. Is the emotional element is unwilling to admit. I mean, it's amazing to me. Like I said, because I hear people, they say things, and you try to tell them something sensible that they don't want to hear, and they get angry, and then they start doing things at an emotional level that are very, very irrational. They'll do things like try to discredit you, which is neither here nor there, because it doesn't matter who the information is coming from. If the information is correct, the information is correct, and you just simply put it into practice. That's a rational way
Yeah.
of dealing with things. But when you're irrational, it's like, no, 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 you are this, you are that. And you see this, sometimes in fights between husbands and wives, is that, the wife or the husband will say something and the response will be, well,
Hmm.
it's not, what you said's not true. It's,
Yeah.
well, you. And it's like, why does that matter?
Yeah.
If what was said is true, why not just accept it? Why decide you're going to discredit them because they said something true? Why do that? It's because I'm just started listening to this book. It's called Emotional Intelligence, and very interesting. It's all very evolution based in the conversation, the way he talks about it. But the idea itself is very helpful and very useful, from the standpoint of understanding that there are parts of our brain that they trigger, and when they trigger, they turn off the rational part of our brains.
Mm.
And so, which is it's the limbic system. It's our emotional makeup, and so when that triggers, then we turn off our rationale. And so now we have and that's why he calls it emotional intelligence, is we have this intellect that's now at work. That's insane. I mean, it's insane. It's not governed by anything other than feelings. And so it jumps to weird, erroneous conclusions, and you're capable of doing anything once you've gone down that road.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea of the book is to try to bring awareness of emotional intelligence. We want people to be intelligent, so we send them to school so that they can be intelligent, they can learn math and various things, so they can develop intellect and they can develop rationale, by being able to make decisions, intelligent decisions and things like that. And the whole kind of idea is there should be a training at an emotional level for people to understand, how to have an emotional intelligence, that so when your emotions begin to kick into gear, you've got something at work there that says this isn't a wise way to go. This is going to lead me into la. And so that's I think really the issue is that, so like what you said is that they don't know. They don't know because that requires rationale and
Yeah.
logic. So they don't know. And the reason why they don't know is because they want to do this thing.
Yeah.
And so this thing cannot be harming them.
So is it this they just ignore, plain evidence? I mean, well, I'm thinking about this from this. I'll just read you the scripture, but the idea of Cain, it came to my mind because Cain is given the logic from God himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it actually says Cain was very angry.
Yeah.
The whole story, he presents an offering to God. God doesn't accept his offering. And then the Bible says specifically he was very angry. So his emotions are engaged.
Yeah.
And his countenance fell. So now he's depressed and he's expressing all these, outward emotions.
Right.
And God says to him, why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, you'll be accepted.
Right.
If you do not do well,
Right.
sin's desire is to rule you, but you should rule over it.
Right. And see, and that's what God's, we need to, it's funny because I was having a conversation earlier through text about emotions, and, you just don't, and I was thinking about it. I was thinking, you just don't see anywhere in the Bible an encouragement for us to engage our emotions.
Yeah.
You just don't see an encouragement that you really need to get your emotions involved. You don't see that anywhere. And so here, that's a great example is here's a guy that's totally emotionally lit up, and God comes in at a rational level. Says, listen, if you do well, you'll be accepted. Listen, don't get all emotional about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
If you're doing the right thing, then you're going to be accepted. This is the way it works. The reason why you're not accepted is because you're doing wrong. Okay? It has nothing to do with you, has nothing to do with you as a person, has nothing to do with you, and you shouldn't feel anything from this. It should just simply be you did wrong. But if you, and basically what he's saying is if you do what Abel did,
Yeah.
you'll be accepted also. But the problem is because he's too emotionally engaged, rather than do that, he kills Abel.
Yeah.
And the reason why he kills Abel is because he's just simply saying, okay, if I kill Abel, then the good that he did isn't necessary anymore.
Yeah.
Because whatever I do is going to be good because there's nothing to compare it to. And so that's the problem with emotions. These emotions are always, they're comparing things all the time. It's always making this comparison between one thing and another, and so it's like, having emotions are not bad. It's good to feel happy.
Yeah.
It's okay, when things aren't going well, to feel sad. Where the problem is when you equate what you feel with what life is, that this is life. I'm sad because life is sad. No, you're sad because something happened to you, some fleeting thing, something that's going to go away. At some point it's going to go away. Even something horrible, is going to go away. Time, the Bible, or not the Bible, but, the old saying of time heals all wounds as well. It doesn't unless we let it, because if the way God created us, we have some tragic experience. The more distance we put between us and that event, the easier it is for us to put it to one side and to recover from it. The problem is we don't put it to one side and recover it. We put it on a shelf, and we take it out and we look at it again and again and again and again and we keep that feeling alive, so that 30, 40, 50, 60 years later, when we think about that event, we still have that exact same feeling. It's still 100% still in place because we've kept it alive.
I should have asked this question earlier. I don't understand how someone really means they don't want to when they say that they don't want. They don't know how to. Can you please explain a little?
They don't want to when they say they don't know how to. Well, because when you make a statement, I don't know how to do something, there is only one solution: find the information.
Yeah.
Not to continually talk about how you can't do it because you don't know how.
Yeah.
It's like, it's,
he actually mentioned that in the sermon last night. This idea of almost giving yourself an excuse. It's like, well, I can't because I don't know how.
Yeah.
Find out how.
Find out. You have to find out how.
Yeah.
And so that's the issue is this, and finding, it's, so our emotions make everything into this deep mystery, and because it's all, it's a system that is at work in human personality that we have to be really careful of, you got to keep it on a short leash, because it's not, you're not meant to live life by that. And that's why I mentioned about what the Bible says about, the issues of emotion, and it never encourages us to engage our emotions, because the problem is our emotions are overengaged.
Mm-hmm.
That's always the problem with everybody, as our emotions are overengaged. In this book, he talks about, when you, in research that they've done of people who've had, brain damage in particular areas, they don't want to be around people. They're not interested in people. They just like being by themselves. And because that emotional disconnect, so they don't want to be around people. you know. But he'd mentioned that they can carry on conversations with people and they can talk to people, but they don't recognize the difference between like a mom and a stranger. That's the issue. But they can carry on a fully intelligent conversation with, because it's a totally different part of the brain. And so when you say, I don't know how, because you're emotionally worked up, you're not saying, you're missing what's going on. Is because you've disconnected the part that you need in order to find out how.
Mhm.
And the reason why that's disconnected is because you have because we control all this. We unplug the wires and plug them in, and we cross the wires and we do what we want to do. It's fully within our capacity to manage those things, but we don't. And so when I say we don't want to, it's not that we don't consciously want to. We subconsciously don't, because we know, like what you said, you walked away and you said, I don't think I can do that. That's the real key. That's the real key. It's not, we say because I don't know how, but what we really mean is I don't think I can do that. Period. I don't know how is the excuse.
Yeah.
But the thing that we're trying to achieve, we don't want to achieve, because if we really did want to achieve it, we would find out how.
Yeah.
That wouldn't even be a thought. If you really, really want it, it's funny, people, I don't know how. But then when there's something that they want to do, all of a sudden they know how to find the information magically. I mean, they actually will spend days and weeks and months of research in order to make that thing occur.
And we're gritty when we want to be.
Yeah. But when it comes to something, I don't know how, it's, well, okay, how about if you use the same technique that you used when you wanted to do that? Whatever. Why not use that same technique? Why are you now stonewalling or obstructing that process from happening? I don't know how, which should be finished with, and I don't want to know how.
Yeah.
That's really how it should be finished. And I'm not going to put the effort into finding out how. I'm going to sit here and live in this emotional turmoil.
Mm.
That's what I'm going to do. And, I've had a couple of conversations with some people who've had some very difficult marriage situations. And in both cases, I've said the same thing. You have to realize that when you are engaged in an argument or a conflict and the emotions are going, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
You're just not going to get anywhere, because that's not the goal. The goal is to make you feel bad.
Yeah.
That's the goal. The goal isn't who's right. The goal isn't getting to the core of the problem. Goal is, I want to make you feel as miserable as I feel. And so that's the goal. And so when you try to bring in logic and try to make sense of things, it's never going to happen. It's just, you're just never going to happen, because that's not the issue. It's like, why are you talking about this? I just want you to feel miserable right now. I feel miserable. You can tell me all the reasons why I shouldn't feel miserable, but that doesn't change the fact that I feel miserable right now. And I feel miserable, and I want you to feel miserable, because you're the reason why I feel miserable. And so, yeah, but what about this? And what about, listen, don't give me all this conversation about how it's not your fault. It's your fault. Well, how is it my fault? I don't need to give you a reason.
Yeah.
It's your fault. And because I'm miserable. And if I'm miserable, it's your fault. And so if I'm miserable and it's your fault, then I want you to feel miserable. And there's just no getting out of that.
Yeah.
So there's no arguing is absolutely pointless in that environment. It's absolutely pointless, because you're trying to argue with emotions, and you can't, unless, which is what happens, which is not where things want to go. But usually what happens is the other person has to become emotional, and eventually it turns into subduing the other person. You never deal with the issue. You subdue them. They're trying to make you feel miserable so that you're going to stop them from doing that. And so you're going to punch them out, or you're going to yell at them at the top of your lungs. You're going to threaten them within an inch of their lives. You're going to subdue them, like Cain did to Abel.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah,
only
yeah,
that's the only solution
yeah,
for emotional outrage is you have to subdue, the other, and then that's why people do things. In this book I was talking about, this guy is he doesn't. There's a lot of factors involved here that it's a combination of things that ended up in a tragedy. Is this daughter was supposed to be spending the night at somebody else's house. The arrangements were already made, so the mom and dad went out, and then they were coming home, and so the daughter didn't end up going out. So she thought she'd be funny, and she hid in their closet. And so when the mom and dad walked in, they heard rustling upstairs, and so the dad went into panic mode. We're being broken into, and so he got his gun, and he's going very carefully up the stairs. And as he goes up the stairs and he walks into the room, the daughter jumps out of the closet and she goes, "Boo!" And he shot her, killed her. And it's like
wow,
because of emotions.
yeah,
He was on an emotional high, and before he even had time to recognize his daughter's voice, before he recognized his daughter's visually. I mean, these are things that happen in nanoseconds, but before any of the logic circuits could actually come into play, the emotions had already had their say.
yeah,
And he talks about another instance of this, of a guy who he's walking along, he sees this woman looking in panic, looking into the water. And he said before he could even ask what was going on, he takes off his jacket and he jumps in the water to discover that what's in the water is a baby, and he rescues the baby. But he has no idea why he jumped in the water. He has none whatsoever, because there was no communication whatsoever. There was nothing that was said that this is what happened or anything like that. There was just nothing. And the whole point of the book is that your emotions, they respond way faster than your intellect.
yeah,
And this is the problem that many people have, is that they are not afraid of their emotions, and so they get caught up in their emotions and they make decisions and they say things that they regret later on. They jump to conclusions. They horrible, very distorted ways of thinking, and just boom, they just go, and it ends in tragedy. And people like that are often, I'm sorry, I did that, but nobody's perfect. And they're making the excuses because they're emotionally out of whack. And so they're always ready to go down the emotional track
yeah.
at any time. And so it's very difficult to come out of that when you're that kind of a person without making a definitive choice. You just have to decide, you know what, I'm not going to be living like this anymore. This is ruining my life.
So, what is the point? This is a question up. What is the point of emotions then?
Emotions are like color. They aren't the scene. They're a part of the scene. So when you see a picture, and you've probably seen it, some black and white pictures are amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. The lighting and stuff is just fabulous, and the emotion that's showed and stuff like that. But it can never compare to when that gets color.
Yeah,
When there's color on that, then all of a sudden now you have this scene that's very different from the previous scene, but it's not the scene.
mhm,
But this is the problem, is that people want to use their emotions to make the scene.
yeah,
So they've already decided it would be like having a canvas with paint just thrown on it, which does happen, and it's called art. And then looking at that and saying, that reminds me of this, it reminds me of that, it reminds me of the other thing. It's just purely an emotional experience, and I'm not saying in that context. I'm not even saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that's how it works. But you can't take that into normal life. You can appreciate art that way because that's the whole idea of art. Art has that element to it of imagination and emotion and non-intellectual elements. But life isn't like that. And so you can't live life like that. And I think it's funny that you have so many stories about artists that have done nutty things, you know.
who are nutty people?
Yeah. And so you know that could very well be why,
Yeah.
they have such a skill at art, is because they're already there, in many ways mentally, and so, they're already at that emotional level,
Yeah.
the creative level, and I'm not discounting these things. I'm just saying this is why this becomes such a, you've got to be careful if you're the kind of person that has, and I will say it this way, you're the kind of person that has developed a highly sensitive emotional element to your life, then you're going to have to recognize that. And you're going to have to realize, you know what, I've overdeveloped my emotions and I have lacked developing my rationale,
Yeah.
and learning how to tip the scale back in the right direction.
Yeah. That's interesting. One of my personal regular prayers is that God would help me to rule my emotions well.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what you're talking about. From that, the only reason I laughed is because of, well, first off, from statements you've made about artists in general are usually pretty in line with what you're talking about right now. But I remember we were, you and I were specifically following up on a guy who was an artist, legitimately an artist. And his house didn't even have furniture. I don't even remember this guy who was like long hair, loves smoking weed, and, just his house didn't even have furniture in it.
Yeah.
It was filled with paintings and paint. And it was a house he inherited from his parents. And it was a trip, because as you're saying this, I'm thinking the guy, he had some cool stuff to talk about. But if I'm honest, he was different.
Yeah.
He was a different
that's
kind of
that's the
character.
thing is it's a unique element.
Yeah.
And it's not being an artist that does that. It's the emotional element of it, of not being able to keep that in check.
Yeah.
And that is the real key is that, this can play out in other realms. We talked a couple of weeks ago about the guy who developed string theory, and from I don't remember his name, but the guy from they did a movie about him called A Beautiful Mind.
Yeah.
And so that can happen in the intellectual level as well, is that, when you're so highly developed at an intellectual level, you don't care what other people think about you. Like I mentioned earlier about people having damage where they can carry on a conversation, but they can't tell a mother from a stranger. Is a similar sorts of things in the intellect. This is answering the question on where do emotions fit in this, is that it's the balance. The emotions are I would say probably the best way of saying it that I can think of at the moment is the more social aspect of life. Whereas, the intellect is the more practical aspects of life. And so you need those mixtures together. You need to have a little bit of that. So because I know people that do things, and I think you need to, they'll tell me the practical thing that they did that kicks their spouse to the curb, and I'll say, I would have never done that. You might think that this is a very practical thing to do, but really, how do you think she feels, by you doing this? Because people do feel things. It's funny. There's no such thing as people who don't feel anything unless they have had, like I described, some sort of, they've actually had some injury or something like that. And it's funny to me, the number of people that I know that have said, I don't feel this, or I don't feel that, or I don't feel the other thing, but yet they have, contrary feelings to the hilt. I don't really care about this or that or the other thing. Like people who are like, really, when things happen to people, it's not such a big deal. It's like, just, it's part of life and stuff like that. But let something happen to their dog, and then all of a sudden they go into deep depression. So it's not that they can't feel, it's that their feelings are not well rounded.
Yeah.
They're like more narrow, and then there are people the other way, that they can take their dog out and then it's going to cost me $1,000 to fix. I just cost me used to be what used to be, I thought what it was. So is it $1,000 for the doctor or 50 cents for a bullet? It's like which makes more sense to you. So you have the other side of the coin, But yeah, so these are the kinds of things that we're dealing with. That's why you have to have a balance of these things. And they're not 50-50. You know, they need to be, both need to be developed.
Mhm.
You know, it's not a thing of where you 50-50 them. It's, you learn how to develop them. You not, don't go too far. Like I have a natural tendency um towards rationale. But that doesn't mean I don't feel anything. I mean, there have been times where I've been in a church service and been very moved, you know, or even driving in my car and just the understanding of salvation and what Jesus did to me, driving me to tears, you know, and feeling that there's that sense of emotion, you know, and thinking, you know, man, what God has done for me, you know. But you know, so it isn't that, but it's not a tendency. Like I'm not in, you know, I can appreciate a nice sunset, but I'm not into sunsets
Mhm.
unless it's warm. You know, if it's a warm sunset, then I'm quite happy. You
Yeah.
know, but if it's a warm rain, I'm okay as well. You know, I could be in a warm, you know, I
It's really got
actually
nothing to do with sunsets.
no, no, it's just warm.
As long as you're warm, you don't
Is
really
it
care if
warm?
it's going up, going
And so,
down, whatever.
but I can appreciate these things. I can appreciate. I was joking again last night. I was joking with this guy because I told him, because we're doing the marriage retreat in Folsom, and I said, you know, you're doing these marriage retreats, Auburn and Folsom and stuff like that, and I said, and I know why you do it, because you love the outdoors, you know. And because I was asking him, how did you land on Folsom? I said, the only thing I know about Folsom is the prison, you know. And I said, how did you land on it? He said, oh, me and my wife went up there. We went biking. They did two things. I can't remember what the second thing was, but it had something to do with finding the trail or something. And so they went off into Folsom. They went on a trail to go biking, and then they did something else, and they ended up in Folsom and thought, this is a really beautiful city. We should have the marriage retreat here. You know, now if I was with him, so him and his wife, because they're both kind of like that, you know, and so they can talk to each other like that. But you know, if it was me and him there, I'd say, seriously, you want to have a marriage retreat in a place that's known for prison? I mean, what else is Folsom known for? There's nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
There's nothing. It isn't known for anything else, and it probably wouldn't even be known for that if it wasn't for Johnny Cash, you know. And so it's like, you know, why are we doing a marriage retreat in a place that's known for prison? You know, that's me being rational. But he says it's a really beautiful place, you know, and he said he wouldn't have done it either if he hadn't have gone there and seen that it was a beautiful place. I can assure you, when I get there, I'm still not going to change my mind, no matter how beautiful it is. You know, well,
There's
I
a
take
prison
that back.
here.
I take that back. I might, but it's funny because I made a joke about it. I made a joke about the marriage retreat, and I said it's got a great view of a prison. And I told him, I said, I was laughing. He goes, it does actually. He says you can see the prison from the, because I mean it's a main landmark, you know, in Folsom. I mean that's why they have a prison there. You don't usually put prisons in places that are you know, populated with people, and you know it's really not a good idea. But anyway, so yeah, so you have to learn how to balance those things out. And over the years, I've had to do that. I got married, you know, and I got married. And it's like, you know, I'm not living by myself anymore. I'm married. I have somebody else I have to think about. And then I had kids, and I have more people that I need to think about. So I'm going to need to learn how to think about these things, you know, not just ignore them.
So another question about, or on the same topic, what would, nope, sorry, I missed one. Can receiving love be compared to senses?
Um,
And then we have another question after.
yeah. I know who said this because we were talking about this earlier. So
That specific person outed herself already.
in light of that, you know, I made the statement, you know, that if somebody said they could feel the color blue, what does that matter? Does that make blue better because there's somebody who can feel blue?
To them.
You know, yeah, only to them, and it's only to them. And so if you can't feel the color blue, well, you're pretty much like everybody else then, aren't you? Nearly. you know. And so the idea of feeling love, you know, and this idea of feeling love, you know, and when you ask it in a narrow way like that, this question is being asked, you know, is it's to try to somehow make this connection between feelings and love, is as if love is a feeling, you know, and love isn't a feeling, you know. And I gave the scripture associated with this, that, you know, the Bible says what love is. Love is patient. That's not a feeling. Love is kind. That's not a feeling. It's gentle. That's not a feeling. Not boastful or proud. You go through all the things that Paul says about what love is. There's not a single element there that has anything to do with feelings. Nothing whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because love is not a feeling.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I use the idea of feeling the color blue, because you can feel anything about anything.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Actually, it almost sounds quite opposite.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Actually going against a lot of feelings.
It distracts. You know, let's take that to the further down the road. So this person is just telling people blue's my favorite color because of how it makes me feel.
Yeah.
You know, and they're carrying on like this with everybody they know. You know, what's going to happen? Listen, when they're around, don't mention blue. Okay? Don't, because she's going to get into this crazy idea of blue, you know, and we're never going to hear the end of it, because they're in love with blue, and that's all there is. There's nothing you can do about this anymore, you know. And so when you try to take a feeling and attach it to something, that's always what will happen. That will always be the case. When you elevate a feeling and somehow associate this with a thing, that's what you end up doing. You end up turning it into something that it isn't, and turning it into something that is weird, you know. And so if I was to sit in a room with somebody who told me about the beauty and the wonder of how it feels to feel loved, I would feel like I'm talking to the person who says the beauty and the wonder of what it feels like to look at the color blue, you know, because they've attached more to it than it needs to be, because love is patient, love is kind, you know, and you know, and so it's great that there can be feelings associated with that. But how are you going to express love then? You know, are you going to express love by feelings? Listen, I love you. Well, why are you treating me like crap then? That doesn't mean anything. Listen, I love you. When I look at you, I feel that I love you. Yeah, but you're treating me like crap. Listen, that has nothing to do with love, okay? Okay, I'm just telling you right now, idiot, that I love you, okay? But you're too stupid to get this concept in your head that I love you. You're such an idiot. And you're so disconnected from the reality of what love is. I'm just saying that, you know, you say you love me, but you're not kind. Listen, don't give me this kind business, okay? Kind. Hey, I feel like I love you. Can't we just leave it at that? What does it really matter how I treat you if I love you? Okay, isn't that what it's supposed to be? We're supposed to love each other. Well, I love you. Now it's time for you to love me. Listen, you got this all. No, I don't have this all wrong. I feel love.
Yeah.
You know, and so when you force this connection between feelings and love, or force this connection between feelings and anything for that matter, you have now made that thing into something that it's not. And it's as simple as that. And so when you're always trying to get the feeling element, well, how does this work? And how do I get the feeling into this and stuff like that? You're going to end up changing the thing, and it's going to become something that is not. You know, and you will just be further in the dark about the reality of the thing, because it's like, you know, which is funny, you know, that we're revisiting this conversation. My hope is that we're revisiting this conversation because we talked about it and she thinks it's a good thing for other people to hear. But
in other words, there was something included in that conversation that's not
that helped.
need to be.
That helped, and on we go. And hey, this would be a great help for other people, And so that's fine. But if it's a thing of, well, no, listen, you've got to show me how feelings play into this. I'm just gonna say it right now. If for anybody, when you've got to see how feelings play into a matter, then you're never going to understand the matter. You just can't. You're not physically able, because you only want to think with one part of your brain. You don't want to think with both parts. You just want to think with one. And as long as you just want to think with one, you can never learn.
Yeah.
It's, again, like I said, it's like trying to understand romance from an intellectual level. You're just going to waste your time trying to explain to somebody romance at an intellectual level.
Yeah.
Because there's a social element associated with this, which, social element is an emotional element.
Yeah.
And so you can't, that, like I said, the difference between a mother and a stranger, you can't explain that to somebody. You can't explain what's the difference between a mother and a stranger. I see my mother, I see a stranger. And for me, they seem the same.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing you can say that's going to change that, No intellectual conversation that you can have that's going to change that. It's not going to happen. And because you can't just think with one part of your brain, you have to think with both.
So let's we are 3 minutes till. And so what I'm going to do is we're just going to kind of carry this conversation into the next segment.
Yeah, fine.
Because it's going to keep going. But a couple questions here. One is, what would you say to a Christian battling depression?
Stop
battling depression.
No, stop being depressed.
Oh, stop.
Yeah, I'd say stop being depressed.
Yeah. What do you think? Because I actually was going to bring this up as well, like in the question side. We've actually been pivoting a lot off the questions just being asked, which is great. But the idea of depression obviously is a result of this idea of not having, in a lot of ways, control over your mind. I was thinking about the issue of like PTSD and issues of self-pity. There's a lot.
So the factor, the factor is that you have to make the decisions. There's no magic formula to fix issues, in our lives. There's no magic formula. What do you do to stop being depressed? Okay, well, what do you do to get out of debt? Stop spending money. When you stop spending money, magically, you don't go any further into debt. So you've already started on the road to recovery because you're not spending money. And then it's like, but I have to spend money. Well, see, there's the problem. That's why you're in debt, because you believe you have to spend money. You have to. Something in you, some emotional element in you that is connected to, I've got, if I'm going to survive in life, I have to spend money. No, you don't have to spend money. You can be homeless, and you can eat, off of fruit trees. You can go in the forest and get, berries and nuts. You can, there's a lot of things you can do. You don't have to spend. So when people are stranded on a desert island, do they automatically die from lack of purchase? Is that what happens to them? They have a lack of purchasing power, so they die? Mm-hmm. No, that's not why they die. They die because they don't have water, or they die because they don't have food, but they don't die because they can't buy stuff.
What do you think is like the cause of depression? What is it like if you were to just give
there's more than there's millions.
No, sorry, I don't mean millions. Cause isn't the right cause, because then we're talking about like what made it happen. But what do you think is like the
trigger?
The
trigger of depression is how we process things. This is always the issue. It's always. You can have two people that go through the exact same circumstances. One has victory, one doesn't.
Yeah.
Because it's not about the circumstances. It's about how you process them in your thinking. Mm-hmm. And if you process them correctly, then you won't be depressed. But that's the reason. These things. So when you say, you have to understand, because and even saying these kinds of things are emotional triggers. But when you say, I have depression, or I'm battling depression. What you're saying at a rational level, what you're saying is you're saying, I have cognitive dysfunction.
Mhm.
That's what you're saying. You're not stating some physical reality. You have cognitive dysfunction. You're thinking improperly. Okay. Now, the cause of that could be physical. You've been in a car accident and it's ruptured parts of your brain that enable you from, being able to think clearly. So that can be the case. But for, lack of those things, it's simply because you have created this environment in your life by how you have responded to the circumstances of your life, and you're going to have to dismantle those things.
Mhm.
And the ability to be able to do that, because the big factor in this, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not a psychologist, but my thinking on this right now is really, the issue is that when we have embedded into our subconscious stuff that's unhealthy, that's why it's hard. That's why it is hard to get out of it, is because we're triggering, we're triggering at a level that we're not capable of. Like I said, the guy jumping into the water before he's even thought about it, or the man killing his daughter before he's even thought about what he's doing. These are not things that you do at a rational level. These are things that are triggering you and happening to you even before you get to that point.
Mhm.
And so when you're experiencing that, hopefully you're not experiencing this in where there's no opportunity for recovery. We're not talking about having killed your daughter, or saved a baby or something like that. We're talking about something that's usually a reoccurring thing, is that you need to start developing, realizing this is your problem,
Mhm.
and start developing this. Like, I mean, like for me, something may happen that, is depressing. A depressing event may happen in my life, but I make a conscious decision. I'm not going to live here.
Mhm.
So in my mind, when I think of somebody saying I'm battling depression, what I see is somebody who says, I so badly want to be depressed. This is not the way to live. But that's not what's really happening. What's happening is they're going, I am so depressed. Feels great. Feels wonderful to be. I am getting off on this right now. It's like taking drugs. I'm so enjoying being depressed, but I can't live like this because it's going to ruin my life. It feels so good. And that really is what it is it's like any kind of addiction.
Mhm.
you know you have this addiction to something. You are addicted to something, and addictions come because of habits. Anybody who's ever known somebody who is addicted to dangerous drugs, I mean, like somebody who's tweaking on crack, or they've lost a lot of weight, their teeth are falling out of their mouth, their eyes are sunken, look at it and say, you say, hey, don't you just stop? Can you not see what this is doing to you? And you say, yeah, that's true. But to the addict, it's like, if it were only that easy. But we look at it and we go, it is that easy. Now there are obviously physical addictions that you have to treat. You can't just cold turkey some of this stuff, because it will kill you. You'll die
Mhm.
because you've changed your body chemistry. And that you, by medication. So if you will take the medication and you will make the determination to get free from this stuff, you will get free from it. But the problem is always I want this though. I don't want this pain. That's why I started taking these drugs in the first place.
Yeah.
Is because I don't want this pain. I don't want to feel this. I don't want to think this. I don't want to be here. And so that's why. And rather than looking for alternative ways of dealing with those. And so there's a measure of false peace, of false contentment that comes from emotional addictions, that you have to understand.
There's a chemical thing that happens as
Yes.
well. You think
Yeah.
about, and Brittany's got a bunch of questions in here, but I'm gonna ask them out of order because the tail end of these are more related to what we're talking about right this second. The other one's kind of by itself. But
Yeah.
the you think about David, King David, sins with Bathsheba, and then he marries Bathsheba. She's pregnant. He marries her. God comes down and says the child's not going to live.
Yeah.
And so David's depressed. He goes into a depression. He's not eating. He's not. His servants are trying to console him. He can't be consoled. The baby dies. He gets up, washes his face. That's the end of it.
Yeah.
Moved on. I can't do anything to change this.
Yes.
While the child was alive.
Yeah.
I was.
Yeah, because he wasn't depressed.
Right. Well.
Yeah, that's the issue. Is he wasn't depressed.
So
he's praying and fasting.
Yeah.
He's desperate for God to do something. He's not depressed.
But the idea of being able to pivot mentally.
Well, that's why it's important to say he's not depressed.
Okay. So
because
can you pivot
not
like that out of a depression? So let's say let's just talk about
not like that
because you have to acknowledge the cause of depression. You can't just say a blanket statement.
Yeah, but you can't say David was depressed and start there.
Okay.
So
let's just talk about let's talk about a violation then.
Yeah.
Some sort of violation that causes you to go into a depression. That's a realistic.
The violation doesn't cause you to go into depression. You have to really deal with the issue of what actually causes depression. Is we don't like what happened. We've got a problem with what happened, and we begin to mull it over and mull it over and mull it over, and we get upset and we get vexed, and that's where we get in, because it's the depression. So the depression, think about it. It's depression literally means to be depressed. It's something that's weighing you down, something that's pushing you down. So it's a thing that has pushed you down, and that's not what David's experiencing. And that's why that's so important, is that David isn't being depressed. He may be showing the symptoms of depression, but it's not depression, because he is trying to convince God to change his mind. It's a whole different scenario. It's not depression at all. Depression doesn't care about God, doesn't care about people, doesn't care about life, doesn't care about anything. Is mourning
depression?
Mourning?
Yeah.
No.
So
see, now we're starting to get into what I'm talking about.
That's what I'm after, though, is because when does something become depression?
When it takes control of your life.
Okay. So depression is something that controls you.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is where it becomes.
That's why you can't just pivot.
Yeah.
Because you've yielded control of something.
Okay.
That's why you can't just pivot.
Interesting. Okay.
Because you've yielded the control of that thing. It's like any addiction. Like I said, you've yielded control.
I'm sorry. I've pulled away from Brittany's question. Don't you feel like feelings help actions? If you feel like doing something, you'll probably put more effort in. So then, and she's actually talking about what you were talking about a second ago.
Yeah.
So then I guess the better question is, how does someone bring their mind under control?
Okay. So
like, how do you process things better?
So, but
especially to someone depressed who doesn't know why necessarily.
Yeah. So here's where the problem lies, is that the idea that feelings are beneficial because they motivate you to do things that you wouldn't, better or in place of doing them just simply manually because you like doing them. Mm-hmm. See, that's the problem. Now, when you live like that, you're not going to be doing a lot because you're always going to be looking to do things that you like doing. And unfortunately, life is just not filled with things that we like doing. It's filled with things we don't want to do. And so when you decide that, if I could just get feelings involved in everything that I do in life, it would be wonderful. Well, number one, you can't, and number two, there are just things in life that you're just never going to enjoy doing. You no matter how, but you still need to do them, but you're never going to enjoy it because it's not something you want to do. I probably should qualify that. It's not that you never will. It'll be a long time. It'll be a long time and a lot of discipline before it ever gets to be enjoyable. And the reason why I qualify that is because I do now enjoy studying, but I didn't always, and I didn't at all in the beginning, and didn't want to study in the beginning. And when I had opportunities not to, I took advantage of them, even though I knew it wasn't a wise thing to do. I just, I'll borrow a sermon from somebody, I'll call somebody, have a special service or something like that. And it was like, oh, so glad that I didn't have to study, because I was just so not into studying. But then I realized, you know what, if I'm ever going to experience the benefits of pastoring a church, I'm going to have to study, And so I began to study, began to help people. People began to change. It began to, and it became a thing where I realized, you know what, if I will study and I will put the time and effort and energy into something, then I can help people, and I can motivate people to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do, simply because they can see the necessity of it. They can see the truth of it. And so, and that's a better way to be motivated, is by truth, the importance of a thing, not by how you feel about it. And so I think you make a big mistake, by trying to be the champion of emotions. You're going to be the emotion promoter, and, well, isn't emotion like this, and isn't emotion like that, and isn't emotion like, you're always going to get yourself into trouble, because emotions are an after. They are a byproduct, and so when you try to make them the product, you're just in trouble, It's going to be difficult. Like, look right now, it's like, I was watching a YouTube video talking about alternative fuels, and it was a guy who had gone someplace way down in just before Antarctica. It's like the tip of the populated world, and they're making, I think it was Porsche they're making gasoline, but they're making gasoline through this process. And so they're having to, and so they've achieved it. The only problem is it costs $40 a gallon.
Does it last longer?
And no, it doesn't last longer. It doesn't work any better. It's exactly the same thing.
Fantastic.
But it costs $40 an hour. So it's like 10 times the amount almost of what it takes to make ordinary gas. And the chances of being able to minimize that cost at this point with this technology is almost impossible, because they're actually having to gather the components out of components that already exist. And so it's the components that exist. So oxygen already exists, and carbon dioxide already exists. But to be able to fuse these in order to be able to make gasoline is difficult, because you have to extract the hydrogen here, the carbon here. And so it's great for the atmosphere, because you're taking carbon out of the atmosphere. And so it's like you're taking away the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So there's this extra benefit of it's green, And so, but to put these together it takes a heck of a lot of effort and energy to be able to do this. Okay. It's a great idea, but there are things that are, they're the byproduct of things that already exist. But we're trying to turn them into a product, and it's just way more difficult to do that than to try to do things the other way around. And so that's what you're trying to do with emotions. You're trying to turn emotions into a product. If we could just harness our emotions and turn them into, so if we could be happy about everything we do, we could figure a way to get our emotions to make us happy about everything that we do in life. Not going to happen. You could spend 5 million lifetimes trying to come up with that, so that you can finally enjoy doing things, and you're still, you still got a long way to go, So try to defend emotions as a product and not a byproduct. When I drive fast, I feel good, but I don't feel good because I drive fast. It's not the issue. It's not like, okay, I'm going to drive fast. So this is going to be great. I'm going to feel really, really good because I'm going to drive really, really fast. No, it's the driving fast that brings the emotion, and yeah, there may be an anticipation of that. But if I'm, going to be driving real fast and I anticipate it and I gun my engine and I blow my engine, I'm not going to be feeling happy anymore. And there's nothing I can do to capture that feeling and hang on to it. It's going to become being bummed out. I'm going to now be bummed out because feelings are a byproduct. When you try to make them into a product, they want to go back to being a byproduct. So I'm excited. I'm excited. Well, what about when you're not excited? When you've tried to be excited about doing something and you've actually started doing the thing and you're not excited, and your byproduct feelings start telling you this sucks. I don't want to do it. What are you going to do? Where are you going to get the product of emotion that's going to override that emotion that you're having right now? That just happens naturally. So what are you going to go do that's going to make that emotion override the emotion that you're having right now? The only way you're going to be able to do it is by doing something else that creates a different byproduct. And this is the problem that I think many people have. And so the idea of how do you get out of depression? You stop being depressed. That's what you do. You stop being depressed. You stop thinking about the things that are making you depressed, and you start thinking about other things. And if you start thinking about other things, surprise, you don't feel depressed anymore. And so I do this with my grandkids. Is I love it when they're crying and they're upset and they don't touch me, and they're just totally on an emotional high. And I'll come in and I'll grab them and I'll start messing with them and I'll push their buttons and I'll start messing with them, and they'll get angrier and angrier and angrier until they are so angry and so upset with me, they start laughing. And then all of a sudden they're not angry anymore. They're not upset with anything, and it's gone. Because they're trying to hang on to all that, and it's going away because Grandpa's messing with me and he's disturbing my emotion right now. He's making me, I want to hang on to this emotion. I want to cry. I want to feel upset. I want to feel miserable. And he's tickling me and he's spinning me around and he's trying to make me feel happy, and I don't want to feel happy right now. And then all of a sudden, the scale tips. They're fine. They're happy. And as soon as they're like that, I put them down and they don't go, okay, I need to go back, because you can't go back. You can't go back to that emotion because you can't create an emotion. Emotions happen because of other things, And so once you've shifted gears and something else is happening and now you're on another event, you can't go back to those other issues, other things. And so if you're depressed, it's because you've decided you're going to drive down this road that is making you feel depressed. And you're just I'm going to keep doing it for as long as I can keep doing this. But if you'll get off that road, then all of a sudden the depression will lift. It'll go away. It's when you go back, no, I have to think about this. I have to burn myself out on this thought. I have to destroy myself with this thought. It's okay, fine. But you could get right out of it by just simply shifting gears.
So is fear, being afraid, an emotion that needs to be controlled, or is it more spiritual?
Okay. So fear, the Bible says that there's no fear in love. So, and perfect love casts out fear. So obviously, fear is not a spiritual thing.
That is the end of the questions.
Oh, okay. Good. Good. I was afraid we were like piling up or something.
We were there for a minute, but as I read them, it was more a run-on question.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, this whole idea, of trying to live in your emotions and disassociate yourself from reality.
That's really what it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're just disconnecting yourself from reality.
Yeah. It's just like, it's like what makes us addicted to things is our emotions. That's what causes, because emotions create the environment for addiction. It creates that. And so when emotions are a byproduct, so it's the difference between going to the doctor and being prescribed. Like when I get sick and I can't sleep, I have a regular thing that I do. I go and get a thing of NyQuil, take a shot of NyQuil. The other night I was having some severe throat pain, and not knowing a whole lot about drugs, I'm thinking, don't want to be taking a bunch of different drugs. And my daughter, who's a nurse, says, well, you should take the NyQuil and then take some ibuprofen with it. And I thought, I don't really want to jack myself up on drugs. He said, you won't feel the pain. the pain, the painkiller in NyQuil is very, very minimal. So you will kill the pain. And then she said, she made the statement, she said, you have to take a cocktail of drugs sometimes to be able to handle a situation. And so I thought, okay, so I'll do that. And so I did, and I slept fine. Slept fine, woke up the next day, I'm refreshed, and that gave my body a chance to heal, because that's the best thing for your body when you're sick is if you can actually sleep. If you can sleep, not go to bed and toss and turn all night, but if you can sleep, then you will heal. You heal through sleeping. And so I was able to heal, but I didn't go, I've had a really bad day today. Maybe I'm going to try that NyQuil and ibuprofen thing. That's the problem. And that's what we do is so rather than things being medicinal, we take them to the so emotions being medicinal, making us happy, feeling joy,
Yeah.
Those kinds of things being medicinal. We want to turn them into a prescription,
Yeah.
for our to keep us that way.
Yeah.
So we're gonna stay, and it's like we get depressed and and upset and miserable and bummed because life isn't going the way we want to, and so we go mix a cocktail of our emotions, and sit there and hope we're gonna feel better once we've mixed all these emotions together, and we feel worse because you're not addressing the issue.
No question here. Just wanted to comment that this has been very good conversation and thought-provoking. Also have another question. Who's loved, referring to the perfect love casts out fear. I'll be honest, I don't understand that scripture.
Perfect love casts out fear. Love is patient. Love is kind.
I was going to say, because you quoted that. And if you think about it, all of those are actually counter-emotional.
Well, this is the thing: is that fear is not, believing. See, this is the thing. So here, I mean, this is the what we're talking about. This is the kind of foundation of this, and where the problem lies is. So perfect love casts out fear. Is that people loving me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, love is patient. Love is kind. So if somebody's kind to you and patient to you, how is that going to cast out fear? It's like, don't worry. I love you.
So much better.
Oh, I don't. Fear just left. It just left when you said the word love. So this is the problem. This is the problem. Something is as clear as when Scripture defines love and then says perfect love casts out fear, and we want to redefine love. We want to turn it into an emotion. We want to make it into a feeling. Then we ask the question, is that my love or somebody else's love? No, it's somebody else's love. Just somebody else's love. If you could just find somebody who loves, your fear will go away. Just find somebody. So you're a loving person, right? Okay, great. So I want to hang around with you because I have this problem with fear. It's not how it works. Because it's not just love is patient, love is kind. It says love, what? It hopes all things, believes all things, endures all things. So those are attributes of love. So you have a problem with fear. Are you hoping all things? No, that's why I have fear, because I'm afraid something bad's going to happen to me. So you're not hoping. Yeah, but that's a problem because, I'm afraid that, because you don't have love. That's the problem. You don't have love, and that you read, from 12, because it's actually from the end of 12 into 13, is that he talks about that, and I've mentioned that before. I did a whole sermon on this idea of love, and that love isn't a thing we receive. Love is a thing that is a thing. It's not. I feel loved. It's like, no, you feel. You don't feel loved. You feel. You feel something, and it's a happy feeling. It's not love. And the thought was communicated earlier in the conversation I was having. Ask somebody, do you feel love? And they said yes. And then ask me, do you feel love? And I said, what does it matter? What does it matter if I feel love? Love is patient. Love is kind. It doesn't matter what I feel.
Yeah.
That doesn't, me feeling love doesn't enhance the value of love. Because love Emotions are a byproduct, and feelings follow actions. And so if I do love, then I will feel happy. I don't feel love, I feel love, you know, I'm not trying to demean emotions. What I'm demeaning here is the insanity of how we have redefined so many things.
Yeah.
Even in Christianity, we have redefined things so badly that we don't even know what it means anymore, and we get ourselves all jacked up, because we can't figure out how to make this thing work in our lives when that thing isn't even the thing. So how do I get the feeling of love? I want to know, how do I get the feeling of love? And it's like, well, I'll tell you how you get the feeling of love. When you do love, then the feeling will follow. Yeah, but I just don't seem to be able to feel properly. It's like, you don't feel properly because you don't understand. That's why you don't feel properly, is because you're trying to make things happen that nobody should be trying to make happen. And that's why you're having such a hard time working out your feelings, because you're trying to make things happen. You're trying to turn feelings into a product. How about just doing some things? That's why, the Bible is if you just do the Bible, you have a great life. I don't care if you've been in a car accident and your whole brain's practically destroyed. If you've got enough brain to be able to read the Bible and understand it, you will have a great life. Even if you can only use 5% of your brain, you're going to have a fantastic life if you'll just read it and do it. This whole, it's.
I got another one for you.
Okay.
Are senses and feelings the same?
No.
We actually have a response to that.
No.
Senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell.
Yeah. No. Because we mistake those. We mistake those things across from each other. Our senses can produce feelings. Like you can smell a certain thing, and then you can associate that with a certain memory, and it will produce a certain feeling. But it's not. They're not the same thing. Yeah, they're not the same thing. And so we use the word, feeling, like we feel. I feel this cup, But if I said that the way that we mean when we mean emotions, feel this cup, doesn't make any sense.
No.
Doesn't make any sense.
Although some people talk like that.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. That's why they're different. Blue. Yeah, that's why they're different. So senses and the usage of the word feeling having to do with senses, like many words, it's just a word that we use that has different meanings.
Yeah.
It's like saw, and saw. I saw.
Yes, we had a season there where we were doing this with our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Fun because they would talk on the things. It's totally rabbit trail here, but anyway, I think this is a good point to conclude. Maybe not. Depends on what's in the cup. Ooh.
No, it doesn't.
That's deep.
No, it doesn't. Wrong.
All right, that's it for tonight. We're gonna close up there. Thanks for the questions. This actually was good conversation. It's always, it's funny. It's always fun talking about emotions. Maybe it's just because of you. Talking with you about emotions is fun. For the longest time, you were claiming this whole highly functioning sociopath thing.
I am. I still claim.
I don't know.
I don't
know.
Changed.
The more and more I learn about Sherlock, the less and less I think you actually are a highly functioning sociopath. Anyway, all right. Appreciate everybody joining tonight. We will be here again next week with a new topic, but the same time frame. So join us. If you are a regular listener, send the link out to folks. Even this podcast tonight, post live, send it out to folks who you think might benefit from it. Even if they have questions afterwards, you can direct them to the comment section, or you can direct them to our website. There's contact information there, and we want to help. That's why we do this, and we're here for you. So. Questions every week. We appreciate your guys' involvement. Invite new folks, and we'll see you guys next week. We do have a live service tomorrow morning. Information will be on your screen. I'm sorry, tomorrow evening My goodness, I'm mixed up today. Tomorrow evening, the information will be on your screen in a sec here. But join us in person if you're in the local area. Regular midweek service is in person. It's not just online. And honestly, you really don't get the benefit online. So come in person. Let God help you. Let God challenge you. Let Him save you, and find out what that even means. See everybody next week. Good night.